And thank you so much for joining me on the way forward. I'm Eddie Francis. And I, we've had a conversation before about being in a toxic workplace, and it's just something that we go through. But unfortunately, a lot of us go through more than a toxic workplace. We have been abused. And here to talk to us about what it's about as far as workplace abuse and actually figuring out how to deal with it on a national level is Kim Williams. She is a spokesperson for workplace abuse. And how are you, Kim?
I'm great. Thank you for having me here.
So I started following and workplace abuse on social media, and I think one of the posts that really caught my eye was talking about the case of Antoinette Candia Bailey, who unfortunately died of suicide at Lincoln University in Missouri. Which, ironically, I've actually been on that campus, but I have to tell you this story. When that news broke, and I read about what Dr. Candia Bailey had been going through, there was one line that a friend of hers said that made her worry, and that line was Dr. Candia Bailey saying, "I'm just trying to make it through." And Kim, I have to tell you something. I have been in a spot where people have asked me at work, "How you doing?" And I have said that exact same thing. I'm just trying to make it through. Or I've said some version of it. And so just seeing the work that you do in your account really touched me in a very profound way. And I'm glad that we're talking about it. So let's start with the story. I mean, what's your motivation? How did you even get into this conversation on social media about workplace abuse?
Happened to me too. It's happened to over 50 million of us, and yet it's like the epidemic no one talks about. It's just so pervasive. But I think for me, what was so shocking is when it came up. I was an HR chief, and I was dealing with the chief executive, and it was just a nightmare. And I'm like, man, if I'm an HR chief and I can't figure this out, like, how is anybody else going to figure this out? And it was the first time I kind of just wasn't put in that position, but put in a position where I couldn't go to anyone else for help. I, was I supposed to report it to myself? I really wasn't sure what to do. And then even worse, it was the first time in my life I looked online to say, what do you do about this? And the advice was so horrible. It was like, get a hobby, meditate. And I'm like, I'm in
Mm,
legit pain right now. Like, I feel like somebody just pushed me down the stairs and you want me to deep breathe through it, I'm like,
hmm
that's not good enough. Like, we need something better. And so I had to go through kind of a painful process of figuring things out on my own. But then by the time I got on the other side of it, survived it, negotiated an exit on my own terms, got a settlement, I was like, there's a pattern here, there's a process here. And I want to help people repeat that. And so I started going out and talking about it because I wanted to destigmatize it. I wanted people to feel like they could talk about it out loud. I talked openly about my shame, my fear, all that stuff that comes with it. And just, it kind of made me like an evangelical. Like, once you go through something this awful, you don't want it to happen to anybody else. You just want to help as many people as you can.
Yeah. And the fact that you brought up that you tried to reach out and try to get some understanding, you tried to leverage social media to do it, and the responses were the same thing happened to me. I will never forget getting on Twitter, and I was so discouraged about a situation that I was in, and I said, I'm going through this, I'm going through that, and I had also been through another situation that really was it was traumatic at work, and I remember the very first response I got was, "Well, how do you know your boss is the one to blame? How do you know you just aren't being too sensitive?"
Right.
And to me, and now I know that is a very predictable response,
Yep.
but I'll never forget that I had a sense of rage about it, and I didn't know what to do. I was like you. I was like, I didn't know what to do. And I did feel this sense of shame as well because I started thinking, well, maybe I am too soft. Maybe I am the problem here. And so I felt manipulated also at the same time. And so with that being said, let's give it a baseline definition. What is the definition though of workplace abuse?
Yeah. So, what I like to lean on is if you look at EOC language, when they talk about harassment, they're pretty prescriptive, right? That, like if somebody's screaming at you, humiliating you, excluding you from key meetings in a way that's really harming your ability to do your job. And so, I also look at it a little bit more broader in the sense that, when I'm doing HR work, anything that causes someone harm, that's the threshold for me personally.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what the circumstances are, I need to engage. It may not be anything. Sometimes you hear people complain like, oh, what if it's Gen Z? And they say it's a hostile work environment because you didn't get them a foosball table, like, okay, well, we'll still have a conversation and set some expectations. But for me, I think the real key thing is the harm being done to someone's career and the reasonable person standard. Nobody likes to get screamed at. Who's going to go out there and say that that's okay, or to be humiliated in front of your peers is not okay? And so we actually all know what it looks like. A lot of times when you get the response that you did, where somebody was gaslighting you at that point, which
Yep.
also happens and causes even more injury than a lot of times than the initial trauma or the initial awful event, is because people are so afraid of getting sucked up into that drama or having to deal with it themselves or to not be a bystander, that a lot of times they will turn on victims, either through that kind of quiet down narrative or just, get away from me. Like, you're in a bad zone. I don't want this situation touching me. And so we call it mobbing, when an individual kind of bullying situation turns into a group
Mm.
scenario where they're either denying the reality or going along with it in some way that's causing additional harm, or through just the pain of isolation and ostracism when you're already in a difficult spot.
How often is it that people who will deal with workplace abuse will communicate that they've had this experience of people saying, just get over it? Is that a common theme?
Extremely common, extremely common. I will say one positive indicator, though, is that I first started talking about this 2.5 years ago. No one would say anything about it online. Now, every time I
Hmm.
log in to LinkedIn, my entire feed is people,
Yeah.
very, very descriptive language. People are finding their words. They're talking about it very openly. They're talking about, and they're getting thousands of likes and lots of engagements. And so, I think we are at a cultural tipping point where, thank God, it's not, toughen up. But no, this really is wrong. We need to address this.
Do you find that that there are certain areas where that workplace abuse may be more common than others? I mean, anybody who knows me knows I'm very quick to talk about what happens in higher education, and everybody knows I have my theories about why people go through traumatic work experiences in higher education. I think a lot of it has to do with this intellectual hierarchy and credentials and all these other things. But are there other areas? I've heard that nonprofit spaces can be pretty can be pretty harsh. I
Which
mean,
is incredible because we get calls from
yeah,
folks where their whole mission is workers' rights or social
yeah,
justice, and you would think
yeah.
that it would not be a problem, and it is. Media is really terrible. Healthcare is awful, but hands down, the worst and most heartbreaking is construction. And
Wow.
part of the
Yeah.
reason for that is, and we see this with more male-dominated fields where there's no safety in talking about it,
Yep.
and so you've got men that, talk about toughen up, man up, all that horrible stuff. So they really suffer in silence. They won't reach out for help when it's really bothering them. So the suicide rates are astronomical to the point where OSHA's become really involved. And there's a lot more research being done on this, on trying to figure out how to engage in a way that makes sense for men in this kind of cultural context, where they will hear a message that it's okay to say this hurt me, and to create these climates where there is that psychological safety in areas where that may not be discussed normally.
Mm. You're listening to The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and we are talking to Kim Williams, and she's a spokesperson who talks about workplace abuse. And yes, it is a very real thing. And, I think one of the things to me that is probably the most disheartening, as someone who has gone through workplace abuse, is from someone who's very close to people, is the common story a lot of us have is after we have gone through whatever situation we've gone through, what has gone through our minds has been, I must not be very good at what I do. And so what happens is that we go to the next job and we get really gun shy. We don't want to offer up ideas. We get to this space where we're thinking, well, if they give me this project, am I going to handle it right? And so all of this self doubt seems to settle in. Is that something that you hear from people who are workplace abuse victims?
All the time. And there's a lot of experts out there that talk about, memory, cognitive function after traumatic events. And I think it's so important for people to hear that, everyone thinks that this kind of trauma is invisible, but it's actually very, very physical when you think about it. So they can now see brain scars from traumatic events at work. And they
Wow.
mirror brain studies of combat veterans. Because in the United States, in particular, when your job's on the line, your whole life is on the line. And so
Hmm.
it can trigger all these very physical symptoms in the body. And so a lot of times, after somebody's been screamed at, humiliated, gone through some type of awful event, you can't even really remember what's been done, for sometimes up to 20 minutes after these things have occurred. And we also see where the cortisol really kind of kicks in. Your fight or flight is going into overdrive. And so all of this is going to kind of impact your ability to process, to function. And then if you see this getting reinforced by mobbing, isolation, your brain is just kind of working overdrive, and you're literally kind of wearing yourself out in a way that can lead to legitimate, when I say legitimate, like what may look like from the outside, legitimate by a bystander standard, performance issues that never existed before, because the stress of what's happening to you is causing you to kind of break down and not be able to function at a level that you could have previously. And then you throw in, sleepless nights, depression, anxiety, the direct links to certain types of cancers, family trauma, financial ruin, the loss of health benefits, so many compounding factors that really, really put people through the ringer and do a number on them in ways where, they're not going to feel like they can perform. And in some ways, they may not physically be able to perform because of
So
what they.
you have a background in HR. I've been a recruiter before, so I've been close to HR. This has got to cost organizations a lot of money. It
Tons.
has got to. I mean, I mean, I can only imagine, and there are certain organizations that are savvy about this. There are certain that are not. I can only imagine for the organizations that are savvy about the wellness of their workforce, they've shown the numbers to the CEO and says, okay, we've lost millions of dollars per year because of people calling out, because of people who have been out of FMLA, blah, 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 blah. This has got to cost companies a lot of money.
Yeah, and the astonishing thing is a lot of those things, like you just mentioned, so many people dismiss as the cost of doing business, or, oh, this is normal.
Mm,
And a lot of it, I think, is driven by fear, of not wanting to deal with a difficult person. And so there's these threshold things that people are willing to accept. So one of the things I've been trying to do is to gauge businesses on the bottom line impacts of the lawsuit, the bottom
hmm.
line impacts of that viral TikTok that caused you to lose a particular customer. And
Hmm.
when those things hit, it tends to get a lot more attention. But we also came up with, I partner with an organization called Rippling to do the brilliant jerk calculation and to get really specific about the ROI on salaries. And so we came up with this formula where I myself, I don't say I'm brilliant, just a jerk, and so I'm just a nightmare to work with. And so we did a 360 review in our system where I gave myself a glowing review. My boss gave me a glowing review, because brilliant jerks always got somebody above them that's
Yeah.
protecting them. And then the peers and subordinates gave me scathing reviews. And so we trained the system to flag that and then to automatically pull the salary data. And so they took my two peers and they took 30% off the top and said, you're losing 30% of that because they're having to manage me. They're having to work around me, call in sick, avoid me, whatever that is.
Yep.
They cannot be productive. And then they pulled those numbers aside. And then for my direct reports, they did 50%. And so they cut all of those for three individuals, put them aside, and they said it costs $240,000 just because I'm difficult. And
Wow.
and that presentation has been really helpful in saying, like, okay, maybe you have this bully who's a top salesperson, or the researcher at the university that brought in the big grant, but is it still worth it if they're costing your organization $250,000? And so trying to frame it in a language that hopefully will get more people to respond to that. But also, too, I mean, people are figuring out how to sue more with bullies. You've got contract violations in Texas that we've seen go for $100,000 where they HR promised to investigate and they didn't, and they fired the victim, and now they're on the hook. Even public organizations, you've got shareholders that are starting to go after boards because when it gets out that it was a toxic work environment, share prices go down. And
Hmm.
so accountability is coming. And so we have Gen Z that doesn't put up with things the way old timers like me did.
Yeah,
And they're awesome for that. It really is stupid what we put up with back in my day.
it
And
is.
so and so I do think a lot more people are saying, like, no, this is outrageous. I don't want to get cancer, a divorce, and be ruined financially just because you can't have a hard conversation.
I'll never forget. I was working with an organization recruiting for them, and they just kept telling me about how they wanted the best of the best of the best. And so we did some drill down conversation, and I went to go visit one of their sites, and it was not a good situation. And I just remember going back to them saying, nobody's going to want to work for you. No quality person who does this kind of work is going to want to come work for you. And they said, well, we don't understand why. And so we're going back and forth. My colleague and I are going back and forth with them. And I'm sitting there the whole time thinking to myself, at what point are you going to realize that if you really want this place to work well, you have to set it up for
Mm-hmm.
people to come in and work well, which means that if you want quality people, you're going to have to make quality people want to come here, And so it is really interesting how, unfortunately, I think you have these toxic leaders who just get into this position where they just start lying to themselves almost. Or they just flat out try to manipulate people. They try to make you think that you're the one with the problem. And then, like you said, it at some point as an employee, you start thinking to yourself, when is this going to reach the board?
Yeah.
When is the board going to do something about this person? Because this person is ruining this place. And so it has got to be maddening for me. It's got to be maddening to be that board person who finds out way after the fact that now you're having to deal with the litigation.
Yeah.
And so when all this could have been just nipped in the bud, and you could have, and let's clarify one thing. I think there are some people who, when they hear these kinds of conversations, they're thinking, oh, well, you want everybody at work to be happy and
Yes.
walking around and picking daisies,
Yes.
and everybody can just take a nap when they feel like it, and nobody gets any real work done. I mean, we're not talking about people not doing work. How often have you had to have that conversation with people?
A fair bit, but I think, where I always try to lean back is it's about harm. It's, just like you expect there to be fire extinguishers. You don't want to work in a place where you might catch on fire if there's no fire
Hmm.
escape. It's literally the same type of a framing and setup. You just want a place where you won't be hurt. And that's really all that you're asking. And so the rest of that stuff can be negotiated on whatever kind of culture you want to have. But as a baseline, no one should be screamed at. No one should be humiliated. These are things all of us want.
Yeah. You're listening to The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Kim Williams, who is talking to us about workplace abuse. And let's talk about solutions. So, one big solution that's on the table right now, something that you are trying to push through legislation, and that is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Talk about that.
Oh, yes. So our founder of In Workplace Abuse, Deb Falzoy, has been working for 20 years, I think, trying to get legislation passed, which is so incredible to me because I would have given up way before then. But she actually did research early on saying, you know, these laws that, pertain to workers' rights, they take decades to come about. And so thank God she did this early work. And now we're seeing efforts taking place in 24 states plus DC. So I've been working quite actively with the DC Council. I met with almost every single member. We've got one council member who's ready to co-sign on the bill. We'll be, back out there meeting with the labor committee chair, hoping to get her to sign on so we can move this forward. We came very close to passing the bill in Rhode Island last year. The clock ran out, but we will be back in order to try and get that through this year. Some states like Massachusetts have a 2-year cycle. And so we just did a bunch of testimony where the Joint Labor Committee talking about the importance of this bill. And there were a few other similar bills. When I first got involved, it was 2023, and over 1,000 people had submitted testimony in Massachusetts in support of the bill. It didn't make it through the process, but we'll be giving another shot, and we're getting bigger and bigger names on board. Gretchen Carlson, Rowena Chu, one of the whistleblowers from Weinstein, and more unions are getting involved, and so we've really grown in kind of this grassroots movement. And so now, I have a friendly bet with other folks, and I want DC to be first, so other people are going to try and beat me. But that's still great. Whoever wins first is wonderful, because the hope is kind of like what we've seen with pay equity laws: is if one state passes it, then a number of other states will hopefully follow suit. And this can really be consequential no matter where you are. We do feel like it's a bipartisan bill, so we've got folks moving this forward in Tennessee and Texas and Florida, just like New York and California. But even if they don't pass something like this, say in Alabama, or a state that's not known for as many worker protections as, say, California, what's really beautiful that we're seeing is that states like California and New York and some of these other ones, a lot of times will say, if you work to the benefit of an employer in this state, and most of your big employers are coming from these big blue states with more worker protections, it can extend into places like, the Deep South and some other areas. We're also trying really hard to engage with your senator, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, on the basis that, he's a medical doctor. And we do think this is a public health crisis with very real physical symptoms that destroys families, that destroys lives, and is worthy of our federal government's attention. And so, I'm super, super hopeful that, fans of your show that are listening to this will consider reaching out to endworkplaceabuse.com. There's a way to sign a petition that will go to Cassidy, or potentially calling his office saying, hey, this is something I really care about. You don't have to share your personal story if you're too afraid to do that. But basically what it would do is it would give you a cause of action. And so right now, if an employer abuses you, harasses you at work, in order to get any kind of relief, you have to prove that it was based on racism, sexism, some other protected characteristic. But most people aren't quite that dumb in 2025 to say, hey, I'm doing this to you because you're a Black woman, Right. So you almost have to be a mind reader, or even, equally bad, they're just mean to everyone. Now it's lawful. And so, but the harm is still being done. And so we need something that's standalone from those civil rights protection that just say, if you've hurt me, I can bring a lawsuit forward against an organization that refused to help me. And so it's very similar to the EEO laws, but it just broadens it and covers more people irrespective of their protected characteristics. So it could be a real game changer. And what we hope it will do is it'll be, a leverage point that, employers won't want this to happen. So they will do the hard conversations. They will do the cleanup work and provide the safety we all deserve.
What can folks do? So let's look at this in two parts. First of all, how can folks support the Workplace Psychological Safety Act? And then how can people advocate for themselves if they believe they are in a workplace abusive situation?
Yeah, so the first one's easy. You can just simply go to endworkplaceabuse.com, and there's a sign the petition link. So if you go there and sign, it will send it directly to the lawmakers in your area. So you don't even have to figure that out. The system will figure that out for you. If you're dealing with abuse right now, the most important thing that you can actually look at doing is managing that fear that we talked about. Be open about it. Don't be shy about it. Treat it like the real kind of life-threatening situation that it is. I looked at it when I was going through this, like if I had cancer, I would do anything possible to treat that cancer. This was going to hurt me. I wasn't going to be able to show up and advocate for myself if I didn't figure out how to do yoga, how to burn off my sad, angry feelings on an exercise bike, whatever you have to do, you have to prioritize that.
Mhm.
And then the second thing that you really have to look at is documentation. So I actually put together what I call the fear not framework. And so F is, of course, for fear and managing your fear. The E is for evidence. Start collecting that evidence. There's great, programs. Gen Z, again, have, created these things like work receipts, which is WRKreceipts.com. There's another great website called Hively, HIVE-LY.com, that is specifically about documenting workplace mistreatment. And so it lets you go in there and say, my boss screamed at me. And then it'll be like, well, what did your boss say? And it'll help you put together something that a lawyer could potentially understand. That's so critical because whether you go to a lawyer or not, having that early work done will be so important. Because once you get that evidence, once you start documenting, then you have to set up a way to inform the company. And so your timeline is the best way to both, let the company know what's bad is happening. And you're not doing that for them. You're not doing it because you believe they're going to help you. You're doing it because you're creating a record that if they don't help you, there's liability there now. You also want to go see your doctor right away. And part of that is that self-care, but also too, it's outside documentation that you have been harmed by your work. So whether that's through your therapist or through a doctor, it's really important that you engage there. And in some cases, it may be so severe that you need that FMLA. You need that doctor to say, get out of this environment, take a breather, and have them, give you a doctor's note to take time off, whatever you may need to do. And some of that may become a workers' comp claim. So like in New York, they actually have this spelled out for bullying. If you've been abused at work, you can be compensated for that. And so there can be other avenues. So having all that very clear documentation, not a war and peace novel on your feelings, it's justified. We get it, like big feelings are going to come up out of this. But just try and think about, if I presented this case to a lawyer, I want to make it easy for them to understand how to help me. And there's a lot of great lawyers out there that you can call and say, I may have a claim. This is what I've documented so far. And some of them may say, hey, you don't yet, but if this and this happens, call me. And you've already established a relationship. Or they may say, are you the only person this is happening to? Because if you're a Black woman and you're the only one being screamed at, you actually have a discrimination claim. You may have some other kind of claim. Look at your handbook, your policies. Like, is there a policy that says, we don't tolerate bullying and mistreatment, and we investigate all claims, and then they don't? Well, that can be considered a contract between you and the employer that they may have violated. And so depending on where you are, that could also be cause for action. And so really understanding, what the local laws are, what the rules are, but it never, never, never hurts to just create a timeline. And I've even had people that I've worked with, like, just text yourself at the bare minimum. I got screamed at 3:49 on September 16th,
Oh,
just a
wow.
quick
Yeah.
text. And now I have a timestamp. And so when I get home that night, I can go through and, I can say, Eddie yelled at me and he hurt my feelings, whatever. And then at exactly, 3:49, and these were the witnesses and who, what, when, where. And then I move on, and the next one and the next one, and, build up a pattern or build up whatever's happening from there.
Let the record show that I am not a yeller. I am not a yeller. As a matter of fact, I am proud to say that I did sign a petition for the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, and I have officially signed on with my company, and so I am very proud to have joined you and everyone else to make sure that people are safe at work, so that the company can make some money. For goodness sakes,
Exactly. Well, and you should be celebrated. Like, we want that word to be out there. Like,
yeah.
that you are who people should work for. You are who people should work with. Like, these are good human beings. People will take pay cuts to go work at a company where nobody's going to treat them badly. Like, it's a badge of honor, absolutely. So well done.
Yes. And for clarification, when I say my company, I'm talking about the company I run, Edify
Yes.
Ventures. And so, Kim Williams, thank you so much for joining me on the way forward. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you so much.